Welcome to the Minotaurs Maze. My guest today is Mohammed Sheikh, who is the founder of Coach the Mind, whereby he helps people heal from thoughts, emotions, and behaviors using NLP, hypnosis, and heart math. Mohammed, thank you for being here and welcome.
Hey, thanks, Zulfaqar. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And, I always like to kick off these calls with just a brief introduction from the horse's mouth. So for those people that don't know who you are, could you just give a quick overview of, who you are and what you've done?
Well, yeah, I guess the short story is, in a couple minutes, I'm a guy who used to get straight A's in school, got hit with anxiety in my, first year, second year, to the point that I ended up with $30,000 in student loan debt and did not graduate because I just couldn't overcome. And the only thing that really helped me make massive changes in my life was getting involved in personal development and specifically neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. And that really changed my entire life around. I got in corporate sales. I was in the tech sector for, a number of years. So, I climbed that sort of corporate ladder, did very well, always as a sales guy. And eventually decided I got sick and tired of the whole corporate nonsense, as it seems, right? And I know you know a little bit about that. So I left that life and I actually started up my own technology business, basically doing what I used to do for corporate, but doing it for myself. And that again, demanded even more personal growth and really me knowing myself because, hey, I was good at tech. I've always been good at tech. That has been my passion since I was a kid. I've been coding since I was 9. But, becoming good at sales. And then everything else, like having to learn accounting and business laws and the legalities and all of that. So much growth. But what the interesting thing that happened there was I was getting a massage. This was in like the last year of my corporate life because, corporate paid for all, massages, right? So why not? It was actually in the office building where the company I worked for had its offices. So someone that I've obviously known for a number of months now, I've been going to her pretty much every month, and she starts telling me she has panic attacks. And so very casually, I'm just the kind of guy that likes to help people. I say, you know what, I was taking this program, it's called NLP, and it's really to do with confidence and communication. But, in the program, I actually learned something called the 10-minute phobia cure. So it sounds like you're having claustrophobia because every time you got on a bus, she started having panic attacks. Let me run this with you. Anyway, so I run it with her and it worked. It actually worked. Her panic attacks stopped immediately. The next time I saw her, she was like beaming. She couldn't believe what happened. I couldn't believe that happened because this is the first time I actually did something like this outside the classroom. So that really sort of, I guess, planted some seeds. And so when I quit corporate life, friends noticed how I kind of went 180 with my life and they started asking me, and that experience was also fresh. So I started sort of teaching and doing what helped me with my friends. And then they started referring other people out. And then, 8 years ago, I realized that, oh my God, 9 years ago now, I realized that, hey, like this is something I'm really good at and I should do this. So the work that I do today, as far as helping people, heal their behaviors or thoughts or emotions, in many ways started off as an accident. Like wasn't something that I said, hey, I want to be an NLP practitioner. I want to be a hypnotist. I want to be a coach. In many ways, I just wanted to really help people. I just want to really, be a good Muslim, like serve my Lord, right? Like that was always the intention behind it. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. And over the years, I've learned a lot of different modalities. Just if anyone is doing something that gets results, I do my best to go to him or her and learn so I can continue to help people.
Brilliant. There's quite a few things that I'd like to unpack in that in itself. But before we continue, could you, for the sake of the audience, even for my sake, what is the definition and the difference between NLP, hypnotherapy, and heart math?
Yeah. Okay. For sure. So I'm going to give you probably the best definition of NLP, or one of the better definitions of NLP, because I meet a lot of people who are NLP trained, yet you know how there's a difference, Zulfaqar, between someone that knows a bunch of recipes from a cookbook and someone that really knows how to cook?
Yes.
Unfortunately, we live in a time, I mean, you can buy an NLP training off of Udemy, right? For like 20 bucks. We live in a time where most people are being trained or being taught the recipes, and they're being taught by people who themselves were just taught the recipes, right? So what NLP really is what John Grinder, Richard Bandler, and Frank Puslik, the co-creators of NLP, what they really created was a set of tools that models human behavior, and specifically human excellence. Because if you're going to model behavior, why would you model someone that's depressed, right? And it began from the question, again, Bandler was a student, along with Frank Puslik, a student of psychology, and they were, Bandler, in one of his books, he says, what really frustrated and also he frustrated me about psychology, but I was also very curious, is how come everyone and everything we're studying has emphasis on why people have problems, and what are we going to call those problems? So why do people have problems, and what are the names of those diagnoses, those labels, and how come no one is actually studying what works? What creates actual change? What about the person who used to have panic attacks and suddenly didn't? What just happened? What happened unconsciously? What happened consciously? What did they have to say to themselves? What did they have to do physically? Really to unpack that. And so the real brilliance of NLP is that they created a bunch of tools which allows an individual to go into another person who's doing something brilliantly, get in there, elicit, that genius, if you will, and then, and this is where the techniques and the recipes comes from, being able to codify or turn that into a process. So if someone is an amazing golf player, as an NLP, guy, I can go and interview and ask questions, not just what they're doing externally, not just their workout routines, but really very unconscious type, questions to a series of interviewing and really bringing that out. And then being able to codify that and turn it into a process, so I can teach like a whole, a clubhouse of golfers exactly what's going on. I actually won an archery tournament doing this once.
Wow. Okay. Brilliant.
So that's really what NLP is. So that's the first definition: a set of tools that models, human behavior. The second set of tools, the second definition would then be actually using these tools, these recipes, for purposes of change work or influence or communication. So it's really like the doing part, but people know a lot of recipes, but they don't really know how to cook, right? So that's NLP. What hypnosis is, there's, the truth about hypnosis is if you get 1,000 hypnotists together, this is a joke in my circles, and every you ask them what's the definition of hypnosis, everyone will give you a different answer, right? And it's true because people even respond and experience hypnosis very differently. What we do know is that it is a different state. It is a state of, the definition that I'm really liking these days is it's believed in imaginings, right? It's a willing suspension of disbelief, right? There's lots of folks out there that try to make it more than it is. It's sort of being disassociated from an experience, right? So, sort of like when you zone out, that's a state of trance. What we do know is that it's hyper consciousness, is hyperactivity, and it allows us to kind of have these powerful experiences. So for me, hypnosis is something that really amplifies an experience, which is really important because when we're doing change work, what we know is the more intense an emotion, that's the deeper rooted an event kind of takes hold. And so if someone had trauma in their lives and they want to shake that off, they don't want to have the panic attacks anymore, or they just, want to speak up for themselves at work, they want to get noticed, but they're always shy, whatever that is, there's usually some sort of an emotional belief that's kind of taken root around safety and protection, Well, I
Yeah.
need to now create using hypnosis another experience which is even more intense, but in an empowering emotion, not fear,
Right.
right? Or
Hmm.
maybe confidence, or maybe, what the opportunity, right? Or maybe really like being seen, whatever that is, to sort of collapse that. And this is really neuroscience and hypnosis, right? And heart math. Okay, so heart math, this found me in my life in 2016. So about 6 years ago now, and as you said, I started this organization called Coach the Mind, and it's a training organization. I teach workshops, I work one-on-one with people, but I also teach other practitioners who want to kind of do what I do, right? But it was all
Hmm.
Coach the Mind, and I call myself the mind mechanic. That's what it says on my license plate, right? So I thought it was all about the mind, but the thing is, there were times where I would brilliantly, solve or help solve people's issues. There's always a co-creation, of course, right? And then there would be times that I couldn't, and I always felt there was, intuitively, I sort of felt there was a missing piece. And it wasn't until heart math that I really understood the relationship between our organ, like the physical organ of the heart, and our brain. So we're talking like the physical brain and the physical heart through the nervous system, and how the emotions that we feel actually changes our heartbeat on a beat-to-beat basis. And that actually sends a very different signal to our brain. In fact, the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart, which is really kind of cool. And what
Hmm.
this organization, I mean, I didn't come up with HeartMath. They've been around for about 30 plus years now, out of Boulder Creek, California. They've been doing research around the energetics of the heart. So right into what happens at a hormonal level,
Hmm.
depending on the emotions, how does that affect performance? How does that, impact our mental capabilities as well? But more stuff on, what about intuition? What about those sort of things that, how like you haven't been thinking of someone for a long time and suddenly this individual pops into your head and you don't know why, it's been a number of years, but you're just thinking of them, and then an hour later they like
They
call
pop
you, or
up.
you get an email from you or something like that. Well,
Hmm.
well, can we do some research and some experimentation around that? And they found that if you call that a type of intuition, right? And they have three types of intuition that they categorize as the energetics. So, like animals can sense the weather. This is the
Yeah.
electromagnetic, and this is physics, right?
Hmm.
And then there's stuff and knowledge that we learned in the past, and we've forgotten it, but when we need it, it suddenly comes to conscious awareness, right?
Hmm.
But then there's a sort of non-local intuition, which no rhyme or reason, but they found that when an individual genuinely lives their life with compassion or kindness or gratitude, hope, faith, strength, pride, in a good way, not arrogance, those sorts of emotion creates the conditions, if you will, for us to be more open or receptive to that sort of intuition, right? And it's pretty cool. But
Yeah,
it's
sounds
made a
it. I
big
mean,
impact in my work. So that really allowed me to sort of bring in that layer with the power of the unconscious mind, with the patterns, the neuroscience really rounded me out in a way. So it's the other side of the coin in many ways. So that's heart math.
brilliant. I mean,
Yeah.
again, once again, there's just been so much packed
Sorry, I
in
know. I
there.
just like
It's like,
it's a
where do
spiral
I start
sometimes,
picking
right?
up? So, I mean, just to put it into the context of the podcast, so obviously this is the Minotaurs maze, and my whole branding is the Minotaur, and that's symbolic of the Greek myth, the half man, half bull beast. So the mind is a maze, life is a maze, and inside the maze there's the Minotaur, which is fears, anxieties. In your case, what you're talking about is behaviors, emotions, and thoughts. So that's the internal Minotaur, and then obviously the external Minotaur are the challenges that we face in life, both on a local level where we might have family issues or health issues, and then on a global level where, I mean, we'll move on to it with what's been happening around the world for the past 2 years. So am I correct in saying then, NLP, hypnosis, and heart math are tools for people to deal with their internal Minotaurs,
Absolutely. In my
which can
one-on-one
then,
sessions, we're basically slaying Minotaurs every day.
and on that note, then they are just tools, so you can use them for positive means, but can they also be used for negative means and have devastating effects on people?
Sure, absolutely. Like any tool, right? I mean, it's like money, it's an amplifier, right? I mean, depending on how old we are, as far as the listener goes, there was this whole pickup community, right? The pickup artists. I think this was in the early 2000s. And it was really interesting because I actually knew nothing about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I started telling people I was learning NLP, they were like, why would you learn that? You're married. And I'm like, what? like completely no, I had no idea, right? And another friend was like, why do you want to manipulate people, right? I'm like,
Right.
what are you talking about? Like, you know me. I mean, but absolutely, right? I mean, there's language patterns. There's, just Google NLP language patterns or hypnosis language patterns. And, you know what? All communication is manipulation. Something my teacher used to say. It's absolutely true, right? And yeah, I am a very manipulative person, if you think about it. But my intentions are always good and pure. I was at a pizza store the other day picking up pizza. This is actually, I think, pre-pandemic, this story. But this guy came in and he totally tore a new one off the cashier, put her down, yelled at her, all because they ran out of paper plates.
Wow.
Right? And just swore at her and made her feel like, and just stormed off. And she was literally shaking. Right? And so, what did I do? Well, I looked at her and I went like this. And she just started laughing. And she's like, you're weird. I'm like, I know. And, I manipulated her and I just broke her out of the trance that she was probably going to be in for the rest of the day. But I snapped that. And so, yes. Yeah.
So you basically changed
there's a
the
lot
state.
of stuff. There's a lot of stuff. I see it in marketing all the time.
Yeah. Right? That's a whole new ball game.
Grocery store, on the shopping carts, every single shopping cart, it says crave more. Right, on the handle of every single. So you're holding it. As soon as you go to grab the shopping cart, crave more. That's a command.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you look at some of the stats, I think they say that the average person today sees something like 4,000 adverts every day now, or something like that. And obviously, with the phones, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. It's just constant bombardment with advert after advert. Now, those people behind the ads might be, selling a great service, a service that does good for people. But if we're being bombarded with these adverts pretty much 24/7 now, how healthy really is it? Even if these people do have good intentions behind it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, our brain isn't designed to have this much, especially visual stimulation. It's not, right? And, I did a detox once, content detox. Not that I'm engaged in watching anything too I don't watch like Ozarks or I did an experiment. HeartMath gave me a sensor which measures HRV because that's a good way to figure out like the amount of stress that's happening in our body. It's kind of like the golden medical standard, looking at your HRV rhythm. So I would watch different TV shows with, like an HRV sensor hooked up. And most of what's on Netflix, the vast majority of what's on Netflix, Prime, Disney Plus, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it just creates stress in the body. So why should I do that? But anyways, wow. I did a content detox where I didn't watch anything. I didn't read any books. I didn't nothing. And, I think it took about 2.5 weeks where I said to my wife, I think I'm finally having my own thoughts again.
Well, that's interesting in and of itself. Do you want to backtrack there and So Netflix and all of these streaming channels, even YouTube probably now, it's a streaming thing. So this creates stress in the body. Can you explain that
Yeah,
in a little
sure.
bit more
I
detail?
mean, and then I get all these youth who are struggling with depression and anxiety. But I mean, like, let's look on what's on TV. Like, I grew up with Full House and Family Matters, and who's like, these are wholesome. Yeah, they were corny, especially with today's standards, right? But you know what? They gave you a model, right? Like, that's the thing. TV and media, stories. It's a story, right? The metaphor, the Minotaur. It's a story. It's something for us to take meaning from, to take metaphor from. Hypnosis, the work that I do often, I say, listen, don't read too much into whatever came up. It's not like memory isn't perfect, first of all. So when we do hypnosis or NLP and you remember something happening, take it as metaphor, not literal truth, right? Because memory is always changing anyways. But and then there's our mirror neurons. So what we are seeing on TV, we're actually feeling like that's us, that it's happening to. So, nowadays, most TV is very dark, right? Almost every
Absolutely.
character, like now Netflix has the top 10 list. And most of the shows, there's people with severe disorders, psychological disorders. They're unhealthy people, right?
Hmm.
I mean, and I've seen these shows too, of course. There's some stuff that I'll just draw the line that I won't. But I remember I totally watched Jessica Jones. But man, she's messed up, like she has some issues, right? As far as the character goes, of course. I don't know anything about the actual actor. But then we're watching this and it's creating, we're modeling that. And there's a part of our brain that's actually living that life, because that's what happens. It's how we learn, right? The mirror neurons, right? That's how we learn. We see daddy, brushing his hair, brushing his teeth, or shaving, right? And then that part of our brain, it's as if I'm doing it. And so I do the emotions, and that's how I learn. It's part of, that's why it's there. But now we're in all this sort of dark stuff, right?
Hmm.
And we don't know just how much metaphor and beliefs are being fed to us is so subtle,
So all of this essentially is basically it's hypnosis, it's NLP,
Sure.
is it brainwashing? Would you go that far and say it is brainwashing? I mean, it is conditioning and programming to some extent. And it's interesting that you said all of that, because they say that obviously there's the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind is more powerful than the conscious mind. And one of the other things they say, and you can shed more light on this,
they say that, although I don't agree that the subconscious is more powerful.
Okay.
I would say that the unconscious or the subconscious, I like conscious mind and unconscious mind. They're all labels, subconscious mind, monkey brain. That's another one a teacher of mine used to call it. I would say that we live our lives mostly unconscious. The automatic processes that we have. We wake up the same day. We go to have our morning routine the exact same way, whatever that is for different people. So a lot of it is just habits, right? But I would say that the most powerful thing in us, as far as our mind is concerned, is our critical thinking, is our critical capacity, right? And unfortunately, most people haven't really developed their critical thinking.
So they're basically functioning on their subconscious mind. So
Correct. They're functioning on a bunch of beliefs. And this is something I say, that if you just rely on the school system and that's it, and then you just go to work, you will die. You live to 90 years old, 100-year old, let's say God grants you a very long life, a very healthy life. You will still die on a set of beliefs and rules and individual laws that were acquired from childhood. Like there's no updates, right? And it's only through the act of, further education. It's only through the act of personal development, self-awareness, self-introspection, or introspection, that's redundant, where you will really develop that capacity to critically think and then evaluate it and, sort of sort out the stuff that you used to serve you, that you used to believe, versus what's true today and what needs to be true today. Right?
This is such an important...
Yeah, brainwashing, sure.
Yeah.
I know that was your question, but I don't know if I'm the guy that says that, Sometimes I'll believe it. Sometimes I do feel, you know, and just because I feel something doesn't mean it's true. Right.
Well, it just goes to what you're just saying there. Obviously, take that example. Somebody who grows up in the education system and then they go to work. Like, I'll give myself as the prime example. So, I'm living the life as you would say. I'm a corporate lawyer. I've got my own law firm. I'm driving the car. I've got the house, but I'm miserable as hell. And my routine is I wake up at the same time, sit in miserable traffic that I don't want to sit in, do a job that I absolutely hate, come home, switch on Netflix, switch on a video game, eat, go to sleep. So I'm not developing this, what you call critical thinking, and whatever I'm consuming, that's just going without any resistance in my own mind. Like, I'm not filtering the information that's coming in. And back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, they say that there's a part of the subconscious mind which cannot tell the difference between reality and fantasy. And if you don't have that critical thinking kind of guard, then whatever you're just feeding your mind is going straight to that part of the subconscious mind which can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy. And if we grow up watching films where there's lots of blood, gore, violence, and war, a part of us is processing that as real life. So are you basically saying that, the majority of us are suffering from traumas in our mind, not from what's happened in real life, but from something that we've seen on TV or video games, and it's just gone past our critical thinking filter to a part of the mind which believes that we've experienced this trauma?
Yeah, I am saying that. Of course, depends, not always, but okay. So let's get technical here, and this will answer your question. So in the model of hypnosis, you have the conscious mind and you have the unconscious mind, and that security guard that you're talking about is called the critical faculty. Okay, so the critical faculty is basically like a firewall of the brain or a security guard, and its job is to basically decide what goes in and what goes out. Okay, there are certain tactics, moves, if you will, that when you employ that, they're very effective in getting past the critical faculty, getting past the security guard, if you will, the firewall. And as I begin to list them off, you're going to laugh because suddenly it's going to become so apparent. One of the ways to get past the critical faculty is creating fear.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Another way to get past the critical faculty is creating confusion. Right? Another one is to overload. Right? I mean, sometimes I can just start going on, one of my teachers does this obviously a lot better than I can, but I can ask you to forget all of the things that you remember to forget for this podcast, but I want you to remember amnesia. And that's an interesting thing, what amnesia really is, because is amnesia forgetting, or is it remembering to forget all the things that you haven't remembered yet? Right?
Okay.
So it's just this whole dump, right? And the brain is like, what is this guy trying to say? And then I follow it up with close your eyes now, sleep now. And you just, okay, sure, that's easier.
Wow.
Right? And you look at, how much fear, how much confusion, how much are we overloaded? There's always a cause that's being presented to us to get behind, right? And that's because we want to feel like we're doing something. We want to feel that we are standing up for something, that we're making a difference. And, but these causes conveniently come up. And we all rally upon them.
That's a deep topic. I don't know. Maybe if you get time, we'll touch upon that. But going back to what you just said, and I think you probably know why I started laughing. But when you talk about fear and uncertainty and overloading, like the last 2 to 3 years, especially the pandemic, that's been in overdrive. And that's been in overdrive for the last 2-3 years. But I would go so far as saying that this has been ongoing for I would say decades now. And some of the programming, it might be innocent in nature, but it's had devastating consequences. And I'll give you another example from my life. I've got a vivid memory of being in nursery or reception class, and they used to roll in the I don't know if they had it over there, but where they bring in school, they bring in the monitor with the video cassette player all in one, and then they show you the screen. So one of the things that they used to show us then is basically don't talk to strangers because it's there's danger there. And on that screen there's a girl walking by, and then a van pulls up, and then you see a hand come out from the van holding some sweets, and the girl grabs the sweets, and then the guys grab their girl, and off they go. And then there was this real drive that don't talk to strangers are dangerous, strangers are bad, which that has innocent it's good intentions. But the problem with that, which I found out from self-reflection later in life, is at the end of the day, there's 6 to 8 billion people on the planet. The majority of them I'm never going to know. So they're all strangers to me. Now, if I've gone through this programming where I'm thinking everybody that I don't know is a stranger, I need to fear them. I developed from that social anxiety, a fear of speaking, fear of talking to people. And I'm certain so many people went through that same programming and feel the same way. Now, that programming happened in childhood, but it stuck with me for all the way into adulthood until I did something and went through this personal development journey, which you alluded to earlier. But obviously, even in those days, the video games started coming in, and the films and the TV series started to get more graphic. And obviously, now with technology, like these things, games and TV series, they're so lifelike now. You can't even tell the difference anymore. But the last 2 years, or the last 3 years now, it's just gone that fast. Although it's been a difficult period. The fear, the anxiety, the stress, the confusion has been in overdrive. And I don't want to turn this into a conspiracy thing, but a lot of people would argue that it's been deliberate. What the end goal, what the agenda is, that's anybody's guess. But it certainly had the impact of creating a lot of fear, of creating a lot of panic, a lot of confusion. And if you're saying that's taken away our security guard, to use your word, what has gone straight into our subconscious mind? And firstly, what is your view of that? Especially what's happening in the last 2 or 3 years, and if the damage is done, how do we undo it?
So, in the example of being shown these things, I mean, we both come from the same sort of cultural background, both Pakistani, right? So, there's something that elders would say growing up, like Baba aa jayega, which basically, translated as, like the big boogeyman is going to come and get you, right? The thing is, children don't have critical thinking. Children, as far as their development of their brain, they actually can tell the difference. Everything, when they imagine in something, they're actually thinking that that's real, right? And so, I don't have so much issue with using a metaphor like that to help children, as long as you are updating the map, you're updating the model, right? Again, this is when most people don't update anything, and this is the thing, school has completely failed us in this regards now, right? They used to say things like this a lot worse to keep children safe decades ago, and those children didn't come up with problems. So why do they now? The reason is because as children are getting better, I mean, the parents and the adults, like the whole model, we're just in these devices. We're just we're not actually seeing real world. We don't have this contrast or this comparison, right? And that's, in a way, in order for us to critically evaluate, to evaluate, you need the other side, right? And so this is what ends up happening for a healthy individual. Sure, as a 5-year-old, I need to stay with my parents, so my parents may say something, but then as I get older, and I start engaging, and I see my parents engaging with strangers, I'm, constantly being updated that, actually it's safe. So it never really becomes an issue, most of the time. And if it does, then, we get that sorted out. And it's the work I do, right? So if you take that sort of like as a recipe, if you will, and sort of apply to if we've had into the last 3 years, I mean, we have to just, in a way, we have to have contrast, right? I mean, the worst place to go for our dosage of reality is the internet. Right? I mean,
which is where we're all going on at the moment.
I'm convinced that if someone didn't have access to the internet, they may not have even known COVID was happening, for example. Right? I mean, now, 2.5 years later, and it's everywhere. I mean, it's on the billboards. I'm driving on the highway, and there's a billboard that's telling me to get my 10th shot, right? Or whatever. And it's not just get your 10th shot. It's do the right thing, think of your family, think of other people, think of your neighbors, get the 10th shot. And, it's not just, it's not critical thinking, right? That's a very emotional statement, isn't it? It's no difference than going to the bank and the bank billboard says, don't fall behind, get ahead in life by getting our loan, right? So don't fall behind, get ahead in life. How? By going into debt. Right? So this is the thing to again, just to be more clear, my answer is we need to remove ourselves, maybe go on a content cleanse, remove ourselves and go and actually, go outside, experience what's really going on and go find people that perhaps are living life fearlessly or despite the fear. Still doing their thing, and that will help you sort of normalize. And then
I completely agree with that, and that makes a lot of sense. However, I would say in this instance, especially the last 2 years, before that, if you said this to me 2-3 years ago, 100%. But what's happened now, and this is my opinion, you might disagree with this, is what we're seeing now on the internet or on the media. It's not just on the internet and the media anymore. It is in real life too. So this whole scare, it happened, but then when we went outside, everybody's masked up. People are now not sitting with each other. They're looking at each other suspiciously. If you went out without a mask, all of a sudden, you could have been the nicest person in the world. If you went out with a mask at that point, you're public enemy number one. You're selfish. You're this and you're that, the other thing. So I feel like we've crossed a point now where even if it does happen on the internet, it's now directly impacting the real world. And that's not just with COVID now. You mentioned it earlier, like every week there's some kind of pandemonium happening. There's a war here, there's violence here, I've stayed away from the topic, but abortion in America at the moment, that's causing a great uproar. But these things are happening on the internet. But for the first time that I've noticed in the last 2 years is when you have these conversations now with people that you've known all your life, you're finding now you're on two different sides of the argument, depending on how you see things. And those arguments are getting heated, and they are getting past the point where people have lost relationships because from it, real life relationships from it. So some things obviously changed dramatically. But how, from your perspective and the mind, like how would you heal something like that now? If something is now so deep rooted, you've been living in fear for the last 2-3 years, there's so much confusion, and say for argument's sake that's been happening, and then certain powers that be, let's just use that term, have been using NLP and hypnosis and other forms of manipulation to basically manipulate a mind. If you've been subject to that for 2-3 years, like how would you undo that, and how long will it take? And firstly, like how would you become aware of it, that you have been manipulated in that way?
How do you become aware? I don't know. That's an interesting question, right?
And I only ask that because at the moment now, it's basically the way things are now. It's when people are having a debate or whatever you want to call it, it's not a debate anymore. It's I've got my views, I'm right. You've got your views, and you think you're right, and there's no it's just like, you're at a stage where the other person legitimately cannot see the opposing opinion anymore.
Well, so I would say, yes, things have definitely 10x'd, but all of these things have always existed. Politics, religion, beliefs. I once shut down an argument by saying, well, don't listen to me, right? Because what do I know what I'm talking about? I still believe in angels. Mm-hmm. Right? And this person didn't. So, I believe in God. I believe in a hereafter, right? And not everyone does, right? So there's always going to be that where, going back into, our earliest of scholars, and even the philosophers, there were so many sayings around, debate with people who are on the search for truth, right? And there's no point about debating with anyone that's not actually searching for truth. They just want to stay, and there's no dialogue there, right? And so let me answer your question in a bit of a different way. So when the pandemic, since we're talking about the pandemic, when that happened, a lot of red alarms, red alerts, I grew up watching Star Trek, kind of went off for me, right? Because I noticed, being a coach, listening to language, this is what allows me to be effective, to help people, right? And NLP has been a part of my life for 15 years. My initial training was 200 hours. Like, by the time I was done, like, my entire, apprenticeship, if you will, I was well over almost 1,000 hours in just classroom, right? So this is not something, it's not a Udemy course for me. So a lot of patterns started emerging, a lot of language started, a lot of what I would call influence, bully tactics started emerging, that it just started making me question things, right? And so I found myself, really immersed in podcasts that were very pro-vaccine, for example, and, kind of reading up and listening to those guys. And then I also joined a bunch of groups like on WhatsApp and whatnot that were very, would be labeled as conspiracy theorists, right? The thing is, being a part of either of those groups created anxiety.
Yes.
And I couldn't do anything. Right? And so I just shut them both off. And I sought out friends who were just, hey man, we're going to go have a picnic or a barbecue, or listen, my kid is going through this. What do you suggest? Or, hey, what are we doing for school for our children? Or, just the boring life stuff. Like, how do I get my grass? It's dying in my backyard. How do I get that repaired? Like, just everyday normal life stuff, right? And I found suddenly I'm able to kind of move forward. And I think that's what it is that, the mistake, if we're thinking that we've been had, and suddenly we wake up and we're like, oh my God, the government doesn't have our best interest. And the government doesn't have our best interest. One of my friends said it best. We're basically like cows being fattened up for slaughter, except a cow at least gets killed and gets eaten. For us, they don't want us to die either, because if we're dead, we're no longer profitable, right? So they just want to keep us just alive, right? But it's the mistake we can make is if we suddenly wake up, whatever that means, and realize that we've been had, and then we go the other way. We're still stuck because now we're adapting. It's like the Hunger Games, right? It's been a long time since I watched the movie, but I remember, Katniss, the group that she was part of when they became power is really the same thing, right? At the end of the day. So I would just say, go back to living life. That's honestly, I know it sounds simple. It sounds so simple that, that's obvious.
No, it's really simple, but it's effective. Yeah. Because as you said, I used to look into a lot of this stuff as well, but I've made a conscious decision just not to only stay away from this, but anything negative now. Like, I'm not interested in anything, because for me now it's like it's deliberately put out there to create a reaction. Yes, there's bad stuff happening, and yes, you need to be aware of it. And if you can do something to help it, help it. But the majority of us can't do anything about
Have you
certain
ever
wars.
read Man's Search for Meaning?
Yes.
Beautiful
book.
And that's a book. I'll name a number of books. Man's Search for Meaning is one of them. The Four Agreements is another one. Although if you're on the Tawheed and Aqidah, be mindful of the shirki concepts. And the listener, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Man's Search for Meaning is an amazing sort of window to, even when in the worst extreme dire circumstances, you still have your ability to respond, right? And there's a quote, I don't have it memorized, but it was something about, we will remember those who during captivity saved their meals and gave it to others who were even more hungry, right? Like, and this was at Auschwitz. Right.
Yeah.
So there's always that capacity to respond. And, the reality is, as much of the fear mongering that exists and how dire the situation may seem, there's still a lot that we can do to live contentful, peaceful, happy, simple lives. Right.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Love it. And just to take you back there, so you mentioned that as an NLP practitioner, as a coach, as somebody who studied the mind, you saw certain pattern in the behavior and the languages of the governments. Can you give us some examples of what really?
Well, yeah, it was interesting. One, I was really interested in how quickly suddenly we had the signs, and the glass, the plexiglass in the shops, and, like the posters. And I mean, like Starbucks had branded, like their color, the green, Starbucks green, like they had branded, like that, right? So I found that sort of interesting. I sort of found interesting, I'm in Canada, by the way, that our Prime Minister, this was end of March 2020. So the pandemic was really just starting to blow up, right? And become a real concern. And all the world leaders are concerned, right? And in our Prime Minister, suddenly it's like, we need to take away people's guns, right? And Canada already has pretty strict gun control anyways, but I found that sort of interesting, like, okay, like, why are we talking about that? I found how the other pattern that I started noticing is that, the big thing that happened in Canada last year, I think it was, I don't remember, because I don't really, tune into it. They found these like schools. Well, I know I'm going to offend someone because I'm not going to be PC right now. I don't remember the names, but basically there were schools that, the original Canada government, when they came, sort of the Aboriginals and the natives, right? They forced them into these schools, and they discovered all these bodies of children, of dead children, right? And it's like, we've known about this for a long time, but now suddenly it's become a thing, right? Like, this is stuff that happened 100 years ago, and it's been known, right? But now suddenly it's become like this huge thing. There's been these protests, Black Lives Matters, like there's all these things which are real issues, of course, right? That's the thing. I'm not dismissing any of this stuff. These are real issues, but I always found that it was very convenient. Meanwhile, there's bills and laws and stuff like that being passed, right? And then the other thing I just found really interesting is that similar language, right? I mean, that's where I know, like, that's when I know hypnosis is happening. Hypnosis is a loose term, not as a conscious, vindictive sort of like there's actually a plan, right? We're hypnotizing each other. We teach each other. I remember I walked into a high school. This is like 5-6 years ago. I was asked to be a speaker, and I walked into the class, and I said, well, clearly every guy here is watching the Vampire Diaries because you all have this Stefan. I think that was one of the characters' name. You all have his hairdo, right? So you're teaching each other, right? But I just found it really interesting, right? And then Yeah, and then there's the whole stuff of the World Economic Forum and, Build Back Better.
Yes.
And I heard that
I was
every
literally
single
thinking that right now. I was about
yeah,
to use
I heard
those
that
words.
from every single leader, the Great Reset and all of that, where, it's not, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist. You just have to read a book,
Yeah.
right? And notice, right, that there's
Yeah.
something happening. And, like they're, and then, the thing is, there's so much now. You know what's a very underrated show?
Mm-hmm.
The Orville.
Not heard of it.
It's a parody of Star Trek. Or I think it started off as a parody of Star Trek, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's Seth MacFarlane.
Mm-hmm.
But they do these episodes where they go on alien home planets. And man, they went on one home planet where the entire judicial system, right, was based off of your online popularity. So it didn't matter if you actually committed a crime or not. Execution would happen depending on what your social media account said, right? And then the way they saved their crew member was hacking into the planet's social media feed and publishing false stories that made him seem like a hero.
Mm-hmm.
And so then everyone voted that, oh, he's a good guy, let him go. Right?
Wow. Okay.
So they have these sorts of things. So yeah, those are the patterns that I've noticed. I'm still noticing, which I don't know. I just kind of live life like I'm just not going to play, while I still have capacity and choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just obviously with COVID and the Great Reset and all.
No,
This
now we've got economic stuff, inflation, gas prices.
Yeah. Even before that, obviously, this has been going on for years, and I know people these days talk about the media don't give us free representation, the media is this, media that. Like for me, the media is a propaganda tool. It's a weapon of war. It was designed for that purpose. So it's not there to give you, this is again my opinion. It's not there to give you truth or what's really happening. It's there to manipulate your opinion and your perception. Sure. But even if you go back to things like the Iraq War now, there's some great compilations now on YouTube, and where they just put clips together of all the different anchors, of all the different channels, of all the different people, and their language is practically identical, word for word. They say exactly the same thing. At the time it was weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. So, that kind of pattern is conditioning the mind. It's programming the mind. It's hypnosis, is it not? It's NLP, is it?
And I think you're absolutely right. The news is like, see, for me, when someone comes up to me and says, I think media or news outlets is just propaganda, I'm like, oh, duh. Like for me, it's just so obvious, right? And for the sorts of people I hang out with, it's just so obvious. Yet, what is scary is that the vast majority of people actually believe that no, it's there to give us an unbiased, like, what world are you living in, right? Or, it's always been about control. I mean, think about it. Alcohol is legal. 900-calorie burgers are legal. It's not about our health or something. Like if they're going to lock down, if they're going to be like, like we're going to mandate things, right? I mean, like mandate things that are good for us. They're banning all the books, right? They banned, okay. So I heard that they banned To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's another portrayal of, again, a white man being the hero. And I'm like, I never got that. I'm not white. I was like, this is someone standing up for justice and defending a black guy. Like that's what the whole thing was about. And the social system, because, he was servant class, versus the rich, right? Like, that's what I got out of it. And, the other day, it was my son's book fair. And I used to love book fairs, as a kid. I was so excited to go with him because things have finally opened up here, and we were able to go in person. It wasn't a virtual thing. So I was really looking forward, right? And, he's 12 years old, just to give you some context. And I'm going through all of the aisles, and I found all the novels, every single book there was a story of a girl of empowerment. Okay? And that's great. That's great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that's great, right? But it was all books about a female character who was the lead, who was the problem solver, who was this, who was the hero, which is all great. Except that I'm trying to find a book for my son. And there was not a single book available for purchase in which the hero was a guy.
Well,
like it's gone the other way now.
Yeah, because I don't want to, that's just a whole another topic and kind of worms, because what they're going overboard with there is we're trying to fight against toxic masculinity, and the male is always the hero and all that. But it's interesting you say that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I saw a post, so, again, take it with a pinch of salt, but a banned books list. So they showed a picture of banned books, and The Killer Mockingbird was on there. But so was the autobiography of Malcolm X. Now, that, like I said, I don't know if it's true or not, whether that is banned, but if it is, that is just mind-blowing to me, because that is by far one of the greatest books that I have read. And I can understand why they would ban a book like that, because that is something which will inspire the seed of revolution, of critical thinking, of saying no to authority, to stand up for what's right, and to stand up for yourself by any means necessary. Whereas what we've seen over the past couple of years is, well, I'm not going to stand up for myself as long as I've got comfort, security, and ease, and you can take away my freedoms, you can take away my right, you can do whatever you want. Just let me have my comfort.
How long do you think before the Bible is banned or the Quran is banned? If you think about it, those books, they're all stories of a single individual fighting against or standing up, in the name of right and justice and God, standing up to the masses. Whether it's Abraham 100%. Or Jesus or Moses or, Muhammad, peace be upon all the prophets, right? Those are the books. Someone's going to read that and they might get inspired. We need to ban that stuff, man.
Exactly. So, to relay back, so the reason why I was talking about the language patterns and the hypnosis and what the media does is because I want to bring this now into another dimension, kind of, if you will. So, where is the borderline between hypnosis and NLP and all of this stuff against things like magic and the occult and spells and curses, and even bring in prayer? Because, the way I see it now is, these are basically things on the opposite side of the spectrum. Prayer is on one side, curses on the other. You could do either of those things depending on obviously what your intentions are. But and the reason I bring this is a bit up because, the viewers of this podcast will know I've had quite a few people who practice magic and the occult and even, do things with demons. And when you speak to these people, these are not what you would think of as Satanists or devil worshippers or anything like that. They're just normal human beings, intelligent human beings, smart people. They've just got an interest in these kinds of things, and they're just following that passion and that interest. And, quite a few of these guys, they're not even anti-religious. They are religious as well. Obviously, none of these were Muslims that I interviewed, but there were a lot of parallels with how they were describing their craft, and with NLP and hypnosis and stuff. So where would you draw the line between that?
Okay,
if you have studied.
So
that kind of.
So let's revisit some definitions, because I think it's important in order for us to be clear. NLP is a set of tools to model behavior. NLP is not a real thing. Okay.
Right. Okay.
And part of the criticism against NLP is because it's not a real thing, right? Well, neither is psychotherapy, neither is Freudian therapy or Jungian the approach. I mean,
what do you mean it's not a real thing?
Yeah, so But the thing is, NLP specifically didn't really create anything new. They just borrowed and codified what works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So if someone approaches like a demon to get their way, and then they go and teach, and then I, as an NLP modeler or an NLP practitioner, says, oh, well, suddenly I noticed there's massive changes in your life. What did you do? Because that's a very much of an NLP question. Actually, a more accurate NLP question is, how do you do that? Right? So when someone comes to me and they're having panic attacks, I'm like, well, that's interesting. How do you do that? Like, how do you know? How do you know it's time to have a panic attack? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so these sorts of questioning, so I can ask them, how do you do that? And then they're like, well, I do this ritual, I do this, and then I get in touch with the demon, and the demon does my bidding, and yada, yada, yada. Right? So, I mean, am I really doing NLP now, or am I, working with a demon? I'm doing black magic. Right? So that's the thing where, like, I've always said, and you know this in some of our other offline conversations, that NLP actually helped me become a better Muslim and a more practicing Muslim, because I took the toolkit and I said, well, what is the model of the Prophet? Peace be upon him. How did the Sahaba, the companions, how did they live their lives? What was Abraham like? Like what were his beliefs? What was he concerned with? How to model that behavior, right? So I would say that there really is no border, right? It's just that in the industry, I've often found people who will be saying NLP and hypnosis. And hypnosis is really just neuroscience. I mean, both of them are just really giving a different way to stuff that's happening that we know from neuroscience. That's really what it is. I mean, that NLP fast phobia cure, the 10-minute phobia cure, neuroscience calls it memory reconsolidation. It's the same thing, right? It's just we didn't know what to call it back in the 80s. We just knew it worked. So then let's go into during the time of Solomon, Prophet Solomon. When the angels Harut and Marut came, they said, we're going to teach you magic, but don't learn it.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad.
Yeah.
And it's a one-way ticket, to damnation, to selling your soul, right? And so the thing is, when you don't know that, now call me a conspiracy theorist on this one, but this is something I firmly believe. I firmly believe in the devil, and I firmly believe that he has had a millennia. I was talking about how I have thousands of hours of NLP practice in my belt. This guy's got, he's really good at what he does. And his mission statement was what? I am going to cause people to forget about you, God. Right? And so, it's really interesting. I don't know if she's a mutual Facebook friend of ours or not, but she posted, another Muslim individual, she posted basically a statement, not calling anyone's names, but she's just going to the comments, and, the individual she was talking about is there. But just how someone in the digital marketing realm is openly admitting to using witchcraft and stuff to bolster their sales, right?
Wow.
And this individual is not Muslim, and that's the thing. So they don't know, right? Like, I've come across mediums, who say I speak to the dead, the souls of the dead, and like our tradition teaches us that there is not that. It's just jinn who have knowledge of the unseen, who have the ability to live, long lives, so they that's how they know things, right? But this is the sorts of thing that, because I've been asked this question, that is hypnosis halal or is hypnosis black magic? And it's like, hypnosis is not black magic. Black magic is black magic. If a person is doing black magic and calling it hypnosis, right, then that's misleading. And maybe they themselves are misled. There's a lot of people in my circles who believe in past life regression. So I do regression work in hypnosis if it works. And what regression is basically taking someone to an earlier age, right? Except I'm like, it's just metaphor anyways, right? There's so much that we don't know about the mind. Maybe it really is unlocking an event, but it doesn't matter. But some people actually believe that they're going into past lives. And, when I ask them, they'll be like, no, I witnessed it. This person suddenly they started talking under trance. They started talking with a different voice, right? And their facial expressions changed. And I'm like, that kind of sounds like possession to me. I don't think you're doing hypnosis anymore.
Wow.
Right? So that's the thing. It's the truth is NLP and hypnosis has nothing to do with that side yet. There's a lot of people who are unknowingly and unwittingly involved with this side because they just don't know any better. And they're being taught that might be hypnosis or NLP, if that answers your question. Right?
I mean, so, okay, let me put it to you a different way then. Like, have you had clients or dealt with people who you would say are possessed and had to use your techniques to help them? And could you, and if you haven't, if you were...
I've had clients who thought they've been possessed and turns out it was just trauma.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
If the person's possessed, I'm not the guy to work with. I mean, go see, someone that does ruqya, right? Or exorcism, right? That's what you need. You need to go to an exorcist for that. Right? I don't get involved with stuff like that. I've gone to practitioners, and the moment they say stuff like, oh, you need to write these symbols down on a piece of paper before every client, I'm out the door. Because I know what black magic looks like, right? I went to, a healer guy. I used to go to his classes. And then the moment he starts talking about conversing with higher angels and higher spirits, I'm out the door, right? And so that's the thing, you really got to be grounded. I had a client just recently, is an ongoing guy. He's like 22 something years old, 23 something years old. And this guy, he's done quite a remarkable bunch of things. I'm listening to his story, and part of me, I'm like, does he have like a mental disability? Because he's talking about being in a movie, publishing a course, writing a book, speaking on the same stage as Bill Gates, right? Courting a Saudi princess, and like, it's kind of too good to be true for a 22, 23-year-old guy, right? And then, I ask his dad, and he just laughs, and he's like, yeah, I don't know how things happen for him, right? But it's all true, right? Wow. All this stuff is true. The book didn't sell, but the Saudi princess was someone who read the book and contacted him, but she's obviously too old for him because she's like in her 30s or something. There's some stuff here. And the thing that I said to him, because he got involved, he told me that in his teenage years, when life was really difficult, he really got into personal development. And, he got into The Secret, Bob Proctor, Carnegie, like all this sort of stuff. And I said, the problem, and he's like, I've hung out with Saudi princes that had Lamborghinis and Ferraris, and honestly, I'm miserable. There's nothing there for you, right? And I said to him, because his issue was just depressed. Like, what's the point of anything, right? And I said to him, the thing is, you went into things the wrong order. You learned all these tools, but like for me, yeah, I learned NLP and hypnosis and all of that. But I first really got grounded in my deen, in my aqidah, like the purpose of life type stuff. Like I know my mission here. I'm not using NLP for fame or money or power or influence. For me, this is just doing good deeds, man. I got to make a living, sure, but really, this might be the thing that gets me to heaven. And, I'm very genuine and open and transparent about that, right? So I said, that's what I got grounded into first. You got to know this sort of stuff first. Go through the proper education, because this is the light that will, shine over the shady stuff. Because really, if you think about it, outside of that, what is personal development called to? personal development calls to, you are all you need, and you can create anything you want to create. Ultimately, it is a type of shirk. It's making us God. Like, I have the capacity to make anything, to manifest, to will things out into existing. That's a quality of the creator. Right? Whereas we know that we can put in all our effort, we can do everything, but until it's, part of God's plan, it's not ever going to happen. Right. And that gives us a lot of solace and comfort too, because then you have people who are like, I worked so hard and it still didn't happen for me. It's like, maybe there's a greater plan for this. Maybe if that thing happened to you, your life would be even worse. Right. So that's a sort of thing where, I know I went off on a tangent, and your question was, if someone comes to me with like this sort of stuff, I would not take that on, because the work I do has really nothing to do with that, and I'm not equipped. Right.
Brilliant. I mean, yeah, again, there's so much there, so I'm conscious of the time. I'll wrap this little segment up then. So I get that, obviously you stay away from that kind of stuff, and there isn't really a boundary. But going back to what we were saying earlier, if, like I said, I don't want to go into the conspiracy theory realm, but if there are powers that be in the media, in the entertainment industry, who do practice this kind of stuff.
Oh, there's not if. I would say there is. I mean, concerts have full-blown satanic rituals in them.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I'm just saying it for obviously for the audience, because not everybody subscribes to this theory, but I would go ahead and say I do believe in it too. So how would you protect yourself against that? Because you don't really know which one has the intention behind it and which one doesn't. So like, you don't want to be overly paranoid where, okay, I'm going to switch off everything now. I suppose you should really be doing that anyway, but obviously, because now obviously with the way life is, we're all busy and we're all got things to do, and a lot of people now, the way they entertain their children is just to switch on the YouTube or the Netflix or whatever it is. I'm having a hard time trying to keep them away from that. Like, what would you do to protect yourself here then? Or can you tell the difference between when it's just NLP and hypnosis and programming versus something which has got a more malicious intent behind it?
So I once had a conversation with someone that was talking about the energetics and the magic of the Quran. And I found that a very interesting conversation. She recommended this book and said any Islamic bookstore would have that. So I went to the local bookstore and I asked the guy that works there and has been there for forever. Awesome guy, just such a beautiful soul. Like the sorts of people that they just radiate, right? So I asked him, hey, do you have this book? And he's like, yes. And he hands me a book. He goes in the back, he comes out, he hands me a book. I'm like, this is not what I asked for. And he's like, this is the book you need. And the book he gave me was How to Protect Yourself from Magic and Jinn.
Right.
and apparently what he was saying was the book that I was asking for trouble.
Right.
And I didn't know this. Right. And so, when I read that, I found that that's where I learned that anytime you are writing symbols or things on a piece of paper or parchment, that's all from jinn. That's all of black magic, right? That there's certain rituals, intuitively, like, just stay away from that. Whenever, for me, it's like whenever someone says higher spirits, higher angels, I don't care if you call them angels, right? The truth is, there is no ever direct conversation, but you need to have that. So I think, honestly, like, I'm sorry, ignorance is never an excuse. You have to learn at least a little bit, right, of what this sort of stuff looks like, right? Not to learn how to, I'm not saying the how, but, the markers of it, the signs of it. So, right? Like, there's a public speaker that speaks at a conference that I go to, and the guy is flashing like Freemason and Illuminati symbology in all his pictures. if you don't know what they look like, how would you know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are the sort of things. I think there does require a little bit of education. But then, the more practical thing, and I guess, honestly, this is just advice, obviously, people, that believe in God, right? My practical advice is, you read your Surah Nas, your Surah Al-Falaq, right? You have your prayers, basically.
Well,
right?
prayers are a different form of ritual. So, obviously the wuzu is a ritual.
Yeah.
The ablution is a ritual.
Yeah.
Prayers is a ritual. So
Like
this is why I say it's the opposite end of the spectrum. So you've got rituals here, which, and I would say purify the soul and take you on a higher level. Whereas the other, I know the people that I interviewed won't agree with this, but when you're using magic and speaking with demons, again, it's rituals, but that is more, kind of destroying the soul.
Well, that's, this is the thing, right? Like the dua that I always make, the prayer that I always make is just keep me guided. Like, I think that's such a beautiful, simple ask, because my intention is pure, but someone can take, and this happens in real life. Evil people or self-serving people take the pure intentions of others for their own purposes. So it's very easy for me, under the path of trying to help someone, fall into ways that are not good. So I'm always like, keep me protected, right? And then I look at the basic things, like I keep myself clean, I keep my surroundings clean, pure. I don't indulge in music, right? And this is not a question of is music okay or not. This is just a conversation. And again, just honestly, an unbiased sort of observation that most music calls to filth. Right? Listen, just read the lyrics. I remember I was
modern day music, definitely, for sure.
Legoland with my son, and there's this mom on the karaoke machine, and she's singing and dancing in front of her 5-year-old, just completely oblivious, out of her mind. Like, talk about hypnosis, right? The lyrics was, "Take my clothes off and I'm yours," or something like that. She has no idea what she's saying, dancing and singing in front of her 5-year-old child. I'm like, do you not have any sense, right? So these sorts of things, I think if you keep yourself pure, you keep your eyes pure, your ears pure, and we all know what that means. You don't get into these things, you're likely not going to fall into magic or anything that's going to, damn your soul, no matter how hard they try. But the thing is, we don't. We indulge in all the dark stuff. We watch the Netflix, we watch this, we do this, and then we wonder why, we wake up.
We've got mental issues, mental health issues
for some reason, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. The time has flown.
Yeah, it has. Wow.
There was so much more to kind of discuss and talk about. But I'm going to actually ask you this before we finish up. So I don't know how well versed are you with DMT and ayahuasca and them kind of trips?
I know their names, no experience. I have read a paper where apparently our brain naturally produces DMT when we're about to die, which is an interesting, I think it's a mercy from our Lord. That's it. I know what they are. I know they exist. I know people who do that. But again, like for me, as I said, I used NLP to ground myself into becoming a better Muslim. And one of the things that Islam, there's a few categories of Islam is all about protecting. One is family, one is your religion. Well, one of them is your intellect, right? And I've had clients who have done psychedelics and had a bad trip, and that bad trip has become the trauma.
Yes.
Right? And so, sure, curiosity, absolutely, but is it worth it? It's kind of like magic. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Not
mean, I
for
suppose
me,
it depends on
anyways, right?
it depends on. It's not. It's interesting because I have had DMT people on the podcast as well, and I always say to them, "Look, I'm interested in DMT. I'm interested in it, and but that's as far as it goes. I would never try it because it's at the end of the day, it's a drug, and in Islam, drugs are not permissible, and the main reason for that is because we should be conscious of God at all times. If you take something like this, you're not in your senses anymore. But I had a Christian that I was talking to this about, and he backtracked and he said, "Look, I get what you're saying there, but DMT for him, he said it's not a drug. It's a plant-based medicinal kind of thing. So it's not. Yes, it can open up this kind of thing, but it's not a drug in that sense. It's just something which opens up what's naturally in the mind." And they go back to this idea that DMT is something which can be naturally produced in the mind. So for him, the experiences were so profound that they returned him to God, made him see that there's more to life than the materialistic world. And there's so many people that have experiences like this as well. So these kind of experiences kind of bring them closer to religion and spirituality and God, whereas other people, they have traumatic experiences. And from my study, from the interest that I've had, I would say is people that have issues in their life going into it. So if they've got negative energy before they start the trip, they're going to have a negative experience. Whereas people that are in a positive state of mind before they have it, they will have a positive experience kind of thing. So it does depend on the state of the human being, according to me. So obviously I'm limited in knowledge on this, but from my research is depending on the state you are before you go into the trip is going to determine the experience that you have. But what I find interesting about the whole thing is, the other way, or the way to experience and have these things and release DMT, not just at the point of death, it's also from intense meditation and prayer. And so my whole theory or interest behind it is I want to achieve those states of DMT and ayahuasca, not by taking the plants, but from intense meditation and prayer. And the way I would look at that is when I'm doing the prayer and the meditation, that's the practice, the initiation process. And whilst I'm going through that process, it might take 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 5 years. That's kind of getting rid of all the negative energy and purifying the soul and purifying the state, so that when you have that experience, it is a positive one. Whereas if you just try to rush into it, skip all the hard work, then you're opening yourself up to kind of negative energies and negative experiences. And the reason I ask you is obviously this is to do with the mind. So yes, whilst DMT and ayahuasca can open up these experiences, at the end of the day, these experiences are something that's already in the mind. And I suppose it crosses over to the spiritual experiences that people have. Like, how would you talk about these things in terms of somebody who studied the mind and NLP and all of this? Or, is there so much locked in the mind that we just don't have access to? Or if so, how can we access that without having to take drugs or anything external?
Yeah. I mean, sure. I've heard the thing too that there's there's a whole capacity of the mind that we don't use. There's been a lot of movies that sort of, again, reinforce this sort of narrative. And the truth is, no one really knows, right? No one really knows one way or the other. I guess in many ways, by the way, you'd probably be very interested in a podcast episode. One of the earlier ones with Tim Ferriss, he had a psychedelic guy, and he actually said the same thing, that you take a psychedelic, you're guaranteed a trip, except you have no idea what that trip's going to be like. But if you, it takes a lot longer, but you can achieve similar states through meditation and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay.
I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. I'm a simple guy. I like to keep things practical. I'm just trying to get to heaven. Right? I mean, like that's the thing there too. Like, you know, I have, like I've gone down sort of the path of what if there's more, and what astral projection and like stuff like that. And then, you kind of go back to, the conversations of like the companions, and the Sahaba, and they weren't concerned about such things. And, I'm like, well, if I take face value that the prophets of God, Abraham, Joseph, Jesus, Moses, Isaac, Muhammad, they're all prophets. They actually are prophets, and you believe that, and then you believe in their message, then it's kind of like, okay, well, what are the things that they were concerned about? I mean, the other thing that I actually used to struggle with was, how come Islam doesn't necessarily call to personal empowerment? Like, why do I have to go to un-Islamic sources for really learning how to, live my potential? And the reality is that whole questioning is, I haven't actually met anyone happy or content or peaceful, someone that went down the path of living their potential. They may seem like that on the surface because they have a course to sell or something, or a program to, seats to fill up. But, genuineness, I haven't. And then you're like, well, maybe that question is the wrong question to ask. Maybe it's not about seeking your potential.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, because I wouldn't say disagree, but I would look at that as different now. I'm conscious of the time, so this might take a bit to explain.
That's a whole other thing. But
the way I would see that is, the purpose of life for me is obviously it's from the Quran. It's to worship God, right? But for some people that's enough. But obviously the Quran and Islam is a book for those who think, and you have to try and develop your intellectual faculty. So how do you worship God? So how do you worship God? So the three elements.
Yeah, it's not just the rituals; it's how you live.
Yeah, how do you worship God? So the first element is to know God. So if you want to worship God, you need to know God first, and then second is to be a vicegerent caretaker on the earth, and then obviously be conscious of God and all of that. So then the question arises: well, how do you get to know God? And this is something that I got from I believe it was Imam Al-Ghazali, and he said, to know God is to know yourself, to know this world as it is, and 3, know the next world as it is. So then, okay, well, how do you get to know yourself? Well, this is where you do self-reflection, self-exploration. What are your natural talents, interests, abilities? What are your biggest fears and challenges and obstacles? So, you use your natural talents, you overcome your biggest fears, you become the best version of yourself. So personal development for me is it is worshiping God, because it's making use of the talents and the potential that God has given me. And it'd be a waste for me to not develop those. And it's just another way, by developing those, it's also another way for me to understand the creative power and the creative mind of God. Well, if God has given me this potential and I don't explore it and I don't know what I'm capable of, then how can I then say I want to know what God is capable of? It's got to start with you first. So you develop yourself to the best you can be, and then you use those skills to help the world, help your family, help your friends, help society. That's how you become a vicegerent, and then you do that by being conscious of God with every single thing you do. So
there's no disagreement at all, because the thing that's driving all of that is getting closer to God, which is the whole point. Like, that's ultimately what I'm about. It's just that I often will engage in such conversations. See, that's something that I think is critical, that needs to be mentioned by you, right? That's the motivation. That's the why. Because for a lot of people who engage in such journeys, God is not in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to become God, right?
Yes, that's the danger. That's the danger.
And that's where I'm saying that these are the reasons why I don't. I'm very curious by nature, right? Trust me, if it was halal, like, I would be all over that, right? But I also know that there's also a thing, whispers of the devil, right? And so maybe I'm having an experience, because my critical thinking is out the window, because there's whether it's a plant or whatever it is, there's something inside of me, there's a substance So I'm having an experience. I mean, like I said, people have seen some really messed up things, and I've had clients who otherwise were actually in a pretty good state, right? So that's where the whole thing is. I can't remember exactly the question, but in terms of, for every person who became a better Christian or got closer to God, right? I mean, it's a law of averages. I think more people will have, worse trips. And it's kind of like the way the devil works, because he'll tell you 9 truths for that one lie. And that one lie is what destroys us, right? Anyone that engages with magic, the biggest lie they're being told is that the practitioner is in control. And they never are. It's like, sure, I'll do it. It's no different than a drug dealer. Yeah, get used to it. Yes, I'll help you out. Don't worry. Let me do you favors, or, getting involved with the mob. And then they call on you. It's, you owe me one now.
Brilliant. Well, I think we'll leave it there, because
it's a good place to leave it, right?
It's been thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Just let people know, who your ideal client is, where they can find you, and how they can contact you.
Sure. I'm a horrible marketer in the sense that I don't have a niche. So my ideal client is anyone, and I mean seriously. I work with kids and I work with adults. I work with all in the middle, whether it's corporate guy that's trying to be more effective. If there is a behavior, a belief, or an emotion that's keeping you stuck, and you're unable to move past that, give me a call, right? Find me, coachthemind.ca. My consultations are, never any charge for that. Let's have a conversation. And if I can't help, I'll tell you I can't help, but there's a good chance that we'll be able to sort you out.
Okay. And where should they go to find more?
So coachthemind.ca, or add me on Facebook. Maybe you found this recording through Facebook. If you can tag me to the post.
Yeah, I'll definitely I'll put the links below.
My personal
go on YouTube.
Profile. Yeah. I don't really use my professional page at all. Yeah. Get to know me, be friends with me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the professional profile has been rolled out to this part of the world, so I don't even know what the professional profile is yet. But yeah, brilliant. I'll drop links for that below. So last word of advice for people that are struggling with their Minotaur. What one piece of advice would you give them to help them right now?
Turn off devices, go outside.
Brilliant, love it. Brilliant.
And hang out with people who want to spend.
That will solve a lot of problems for many people. So once again, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, drop any comments or questions you got in the comments below. Hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care now.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.